So good evening, everyone, and welcome on behalf of the Bartlett School of Planning to the 2025 Sir Peter Hall Annual Lecture. My name is John Tomini. I'm Professor of Urban and Regional Planning in the Bartlett and UCL's Pro-Provost for Regional Communities. It's my great privilege to chair this evening's event. And to introduce our speaker, who I will do that in a moment. First, a word about the occasion. The Sir Peter Hall Lecture is named for our late and much missed colleague. Professor Sir Peter Hall was a scholar of global renown who made a major impact in academic debates about the development of cities and regions. Peter had an encyclopedic knowledge of the world's cities, and he wrote beautifully about them. He was in high demand as a lecturer around the world, but he was also closely engaged with urban and regional policy, especially in the UK. Ministers of all political parties listened to his advice and wisdom. In his later years, Peter made practical contributions to the efforts to regenerate his beloved Blackpool in Lancashire, a once glorious seaside town that has become a byword for urban decline, and to which he was evacuated as a child. So this lecture has always been concerned with both academic topics and contemporary policy challenges. The Sir Peter Hall Lecture concludes the Bartlett School of Planning series of public lectures which commenced at the beginning of the first term back in October. In these lectures, we've heard about the consequences of planning deregulation from Ben Clifford, the government's plans for a new generation of new towns from Hugh Ellis and Katie Locke, the future of suburbs from Dan Ringelstein, and community land trusts from Tom Moore. If you're interested in any of these topics, the lectures are all recorded and on our YouTube channel. Sign up at our website if you wish to be informed about next year's series. It's also our tradition on these occasions to offer some hospitality, so please join us for refreshments just outside when the lecture is finished. So the Bartlett School of Planning public lecture series is very ably organised by my colleague, Professor Nick Gallant, to whom my colleagues and I owe our thanks for producing an exceptionally engaging, stimulating and well-attended set of lectures this year. Thanks also to Mallory Bantala for her role in making the series happen. Nick has graciously delegated responsibility to me this evening to host this lecture, and I'm honoured to assume the mantle, so thanks again, Nick. To our speaker then, the main business. It's a very great pleasure for me, indeed a very rare pleasure at UCL, to introduce a fellow Northeasterner, the Mayor of the Northeast, Kim McGuinness. A little over a year ago, Kim was elected as the first mayor of the Northeast. At the time, she was only the second female elected regional mayor in England, so it was a doubly auspicious occasion. Kim was born and raised in the West End of Newcastle. She was educated at local schools and at Newcastle University, where she studied history. Previously, she served as a local councillor in Newcastle and as the Police and Crime Commissioner for Northumbria before being elected mayor. Kim was elected on a very distinctive manifesto that promised action on the major challenges that face the region, including tackling the highest rates of child poverty in England. She also identified the need to rebuild the foundational economy, that is, those parts of the economy that impact most on everyday life, especially in the poorest communities. I mention these themes because I know they resonate with several of you gathered here this evening, perhaps especially with colleagues from UCL Policy Lab and the Institute for Global Prosperity. Kim arrives freshly here from UK REEF, is that how you say it?
I think so.
I think so, okay. The UK's Real Estate Investment and Infrastructure Forum, which has been held in Leeds this week, where she announced a North East investment prospectus to attract international investment in offshore and energy, advanced manufacturing, the creative industries, life sciences, digital, defence and space. So, The matters with which Kim is grappling are very suitable themes for the Sir Peter Hall lecture. A year ago, Kim was elected to govern a brand new jurisdiction. The North East Mayoral Authority replaced the previous smaller North of Tyne Authority. So not only has Kim been trying to implement her manifesto, but also simultaneously she's been trying to build the organisation that will deliver it. Setting sail, as it were, while the ship is still being built, which I think is an appropriate metaphor for the daughter of a Tyneside shipyard worker. Yeah. So there'll be opportunity at the end of this lecture to ask Kim questions, and I'll say more about that when she's concluded her speech. All that remains for me to say is, Kim, you are very welcome in the Bartlett, at UCL and in London. The floor is now yours.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, John. Thank you. So it really is a privilege. Thank you very much for having me. I just want to check that we've shut the doors properly, because I think where I'm going to start is something that some of you might not be dead happy with, if I'm 100% honest. I'm going to defend reform, or at least I'm going to defend their right to exist, and specifically defend them from an attack that I doubt they will even see is coming. But don't worry, I'm not defecting. I think that's really important. I think far too many of Reform's representatives are very talented at one thing and one thing only. They're exploiting the frustrated. And when we say Reform offer easy, populist answers, what we often mean is they're just really good at lying to people. And I think we should be much more upfront about that. But as a party, in a democracy, they remain valid. Over the last few months, I've spoken to quite a lot of arts organisations because I think that we should devolve Arts Council. I think it's too centralised, and I don't understand why the decisions are made in London when we're perfectly capable of making them in the regions. And also, the funding model's broken. Too much money goes to the centre. And arts organisations know that. And the response has been pretty shocking. The larger the institution, the more London the institution, the more opposed they are to devolving funding. Because, as one put it to me on a recent forum, the voters might elect the wrong mayor. And that is at the heart how our country got into the mess we're in now. As a nation, we just didn't trust the people. We concentrated power among a small number of highly educated people in London. I hope you don't feel offended by that, by the way. And then we turned a blind eye to the results. I want to set out today why I think that devolution is a step towards reversing that crisis of trust, and if we deliver of trust, and how, if we deliver in the everyday economy, we can use devolution as a means to reverse that march of populism that we're currently on. Before I go any further, John really kindly introduced me as a Northeasterner, and I've introduced myself so many times by saying, I'm Kim McGuinness and I live the North East. I've said it over and over again during my election campaign. I've said an awful lot since, and quite often I'm faced with cynicism from people who look and think, all right, a local politician who lives where she lives, shock. And actually, I've had quite a lot of scepticism and a little bit of political jibing from people who think that it's a little bit lightweight to say it, but I think it's our biggest economic asset. And I say it a lot, not just because it's completely true, which it is, but because Northern identity and Northern pride runs through me in the same way as it runs through the 2.1 million people that I now represent. I think I was the only candidate in my election, so I stood against 5 other people. I think it was 5 other people, I think there was 6 of us, that mentioned pride and Northern identity. And those sneering political jibes came despite the fact that it's our biggest economic asset. In an age of social media algorithms promoting hate beyond hope, there apparently wasn't an awful lot of space for a positive regional message. Instead, it became about who you were against, and that being much more important than what and who you're for. Or at least it does when you talk about online politics, and we see that march continue. But identity really matters. It fuels the North with a sense of pride. As John mentioned, I am the daughter of a scaffolder who worked on the shipyards. And I don't think of myself as particularly nostalgic for that era. I only just about remember ships being built on Tyneside, although we are seeing some shoots of shipbuilding happening once again now. But I know the value of the industry that we had once on the Tyne. It's in my northern DNA. My dad worked at Swan Hunters, which was one of the biggest shipbuilders, not just here, but around the world. And I actually took him back during my election. It was one of those things where the team said to me, you should take your dad down to where the Swans Yard was and do an election video. And I thought, oh my God, I really don't want to do that. And I thought, my dad won't want to do it either, but we're going to do it because this is an election and I know he'll say yes, because he'll never say no to me. But do you know what? The truth is, he absolutely loved it. He loved standing there and reminiscing. He would talk about how once upon a time there were so many ships being built on the yards that you could literally hop between them. He could clearly see and identify the link between the old industries that once existed there, in oil and gas and shipbuilding, and the new green energy industries. And when he was growing up, he told me that that manual trade on the yards, that was his only option. That was it, just that one option. He absolutely knew he was going to work there, just the same way as down the road in County Durham or up the road in South East Northumberland, they knew they would definitely work down the mines. Those jobs were absolutely central to his expectation of himself and of his identity. And he never, ever, ever said it with regret. He was really proud of the work that he did. He didn't over-romanticize it either. The truth is, it was unstable, it was difficult, like many families. We had uncertain Christmases when he was laid off, only to be back there in the spring once again. And fast forward 40 years, and the North faces a problem that grew out of these emotional ties with those old industries. We have got really strong sense of pride, a really strong sense of identity. But in some parts of the North, that's all we've got left. Everything else, as Fiona Hill, who's the Chancellor of Durham, and Bishop Auchinleck, who then went on to work in the White House as a national security advisor, what she calls the infrastructure of opportunity, which I think is the perfect way to describe it. It's just been stripped away. The jobs went, the youth clubs went, the high streets have been diminished. The loss is exactly what political forces like reform lean on and capitalise on. And they can also be, because what is missing is any ability for local leaders to significantly counter that loss. So I'm trying, as a mayor, a new mayor, to use devolution to reverse this. Over the last 12 months since I was elected, we've been leading the North East Combined Authority using a relatively limited devolution deal and set of powers. If we're honest, all of the devolution deals around the country are still quite limited, but we're using it nonetheless to be ruthlessly focused on delivery in communities and on collaboration that allows more delivery. Not just the delivery of the high-end investments like the Crown Works film studio that we're going to build on the banks of the Wear, but delivery at the foundations of our economy, in that very building, that very film studio, the carpenters and the makeup artists that for whom it represents opportunity in the 8,000 strong workforce that'll be needed to run it. And I'm not doing it just because it's good politics. It's because there is a moral cause that our nation, I don't think, can any longer ignore. A cause that says we have to hand power back to people where they live. Now, I should caveat pretty much everything I'm going to say through the course of this lecture by saying I am a complete and utter devolution zealot. The country is one of the most centralised in the world, and as the mayor for the region that is the furthest away in England from Westminster and Whitehall, let me tell you, you can tell. If we want to avoid more political shocks like Brexit or like Boris Johnson-style populism, we have to hand people local political agency. As mayor, of course, I would say the next bit. But we have to be bolder about creating that single point of accountability so people can vote in and, of course, vote out a mayor based on the realistic ability to deliver against local need. That means real, tangible delivery. Things that people can feel and see and touch and understand in their communities, things that they know are for them, not conceptual delivery that exists in press releases from well-resourced government departments, but then doesn't ever land in a local neighbourhood. So I'm pretty proud that this month alone, we've been able to announce through the Combined Authority, with global businesses, with local businesses and with government, around 2,500 manufacturing jobs in our region. When I say the last month, actually, it's pretty much the last 2 weeks, so it's a really positive thing. But I want those to be a realistic career option for the people in our region, a sign of a commitment to tangible delivery. There's 2 really good examples of things that we're doing to demonstrate this approach. So the first thing I'm going to talk about buses, so it won't surprise you, I'm there talking about buses. And the second is a public transport thing that might be a little bit less expected. Most of the UK's decision makers, particularly those that work in transport, work in London, and they live in London. And in London, the buses work. They're pretty cheap. Information about them is really easy to find. And the reverse is completely true outside of the nation's economic and political capital. I sat on a panel at UK Reef a couple of days ago with David Skaith, who's my colleague in North Yorkshire. And he remarked that if you miss a bus in London, you wait 3 minutes and the next bus comes. In some of his rural villages, if you miss a bus, you're literally waiting 4 days. And in a region like ours, I went out campaigning in recent local elections in County Durham. Went really well. And we went to this beautiful village called Whitton-le-Weir. Gorgeous, lovely, like southern Durham village. Like, actually, fairly affluent with pockets of deprivation. And we walked past this bus stop. And on it, it just said, school bus, once a day, no service for anything else. So that is literally what we are dealing with. The first thing that I did as mayor, literally the first thing, on day 1, within the first hour, was start the process of bus franchising. Because nothing says left behind, nothing says kept behind, like buses that simply just don't show up anymore. They're completely integral to the needs of communities. Even more so as local jobs disappear from towns and villages and careers start to converge only around cities. For years, bus services have just declined. Routes have disappeared, fares have increased. A job that was once an affordable bus ride away now might take you 2 or 3 buses, and there's no one-day ticket that you can get to ride all of them because they're all run by private companies and they're all different companies. And so we will reverse this. And at the moment, because of the legislation, it does take time, but we will reverse it. So our mayoralty will create, as promised in the manifesto, that integrated transport system with one pass to ride around on the bus and the light rail network. That probably doesn't feel like an awful lot of an achievement to you in central London, but to us, we just simply don't have it, and that is our starting point. The second area that I want to highlight is actually women's safety on public transport. And I suppose I'm pretty uniquely placed, well, not quite uniquely anymore, as a mayor with control over transport to tackle this specific issue. We recently set out our local transport plan. It's a statutory document which is all about how you're going to deliver transport. And I think that we were the first in the country to have a proper specific focus on safety for women and girls included in it, as opposed to just the odd bullet point here and there in a different section. And that might sound a little bit theoretical and just something that's buried in the detail, but it's a framework that will actually get us somewhere. We've all been there, the women of us in the room. We've plotted our route home, we've decided there's no safe route, and so we just haven't gone out. And that is 50% of the population. It is bad for our economy, it's holding women back from jobs, and frankly, it is just unjust to take away the freedom public transport offers because it just doesn't feel safe. Before I was the mayor, as John mentioned, I was the Police and Crime Commissioner. And the then Tory government came to us and they said, we want to spend some money on women's safety. We did 2 things that for regional government, I think, were pretty radical. One, we said that it had to be visible safety improvements. So not education programmes for drivers and for women leaning into the comms. And 2, we said we're going to put money into the local transport network because that is where women told us that they felt unsafe. Now, what we could have done is probably spent an awful lot of money educating and training bus drivers and train staff and then communicating with women to tell them that their perception of safety was wrong and that everything was great. And let me tell you, as a woman in public office responsible for this stuff, I desperately want to be able to guarantee a woman her safety as she travels around. But we all know that I can't do that. I can talk until I'm blue in the face about how actually, you know, the statistics are there and it's really very safe. But if you don't feel safe, it makes absolutely no difference at all. You're just not going to do it. So instead, we put security guards on the transport network. And it sounds so mundane that it would be hardly worth mentioning, but it's the sort of thing that you rarely see in this world where things are cut. Women are told that things are going to get better, and they're given the stats to show how rare those attacks are. And yet, women like me and women like you in the audience will clutch your keys when you walk alone through a dark bus station in the evening. What we want as women is not educational material. What we want is action. We want our voices to be heard. We want the power to elect a person who can actually act on those concerns and do something about it. Devolution is at its best when it hands power back to these women, and also to the men and the children who have everything at stake in their region's success, in ending not just the north-south divide, but those divides that exist between public services and inside regions as well. So the next step on the devolution journey have to be built on getting the basics right, I think, in handing that power back to the people, as I've said. That means a new approach in the corridors of power. It's interesting because actually I've been booked. John tapped me up for this lecture pretty much 2 days after I got elected last year. And in an absolute fit of probably total and utter exhaustion, I thought, yeah, I could do a lecture, but here we are. But I'm actually down, not just for this, but tomorrow we'll have the Council of Mayors with the Deputy Prime Minister and the Council of Regions and Nations with the Prime Minister. So the timing for this is pretty exceptional. I accidentally leaked that earlier this week. I don't know if I'm still doing it, but never mind, we're here now. So we've got to have that new approach in the corridors of power. To put it bluntly, we need the civil service in Whitehall to stop making decisions about who can be trusted to deliver based on the sound of someone's accent or where they come from in the country. Our current North East devolution deal was agreed under the last Conservative government. I'm pretty confident that the Deputy Prime Minister wants to go far beyond this with regional devolution, and we're starting to see the green shoots of that. We've got the English devolution bill now making its way through Parliament. We're starting to see that we are changing the way that this country is run in the interests of the people that live here. But it isn't enough, and it isn't going fast enough, and we have to only consider it a start. And now what we need is to get that belief that exists in Downing Street and in MHCLG into other parts of Whitehall. Because, let's be honest, in some parts of Whitehall, I don't think that they were particularly happy to sign off our current devolution deal, given the amount of double accounting that we have to do. We have to, just in order to go through our basic skills, to utilise our basic skills funding, so-called devolved, the red tape, we have to go through some unbelievable red tape and double accounting. What it really means is that those projects are North East picked, but they are London managed, and that isn't devolution. The North East and the devolution movement has so much more than that to offer this country. And so I want to briefly cover 3 areas that I think are really important when it comes to devolution and I think need to be next. So I'm going to talk about briefly housing, which I know will be familiar to a lot of you, but I'm also going to talk about skills and fiscal devolution as well, where I think these are the things that I think we need to go the fastest to the greatest. And it's all starting from the principle that devolution is a process that works best when it has direct input into people's day-to-day lives. On housing, I think that it is entirely understandable that a new government who's secured an election and a big landslide, and they see the crisis before them, the housing crisis before them, to set a national target. I totally get it. But in the North East, our housing needs go way beyond those of first-time buyers who want to get on the ladder. We would do a lot more to create a sense of security in place if we addressed the 66,000 people who are sat on our social housing waiting list. To put that into context, my area is 2.1 million people. We've got 66,000 on our waiting list. Richard Parker in the West Midlands represents 3 million people, and he has 50-something thousand on his waiting list. So that shows you the context. We need to be doing more of that than building out-of-city housing for first-time buyers. The housing needs in the North East, just as in other regions, are uniquely ours. There is nowhere near enough social housing. The quality of the housing that is available is just not good enough. And it's just not up to scratch. And the legacy of deindustrialisation means that in some places, even renting a social house takes up far too much of your very limited income. Many of the Tory devolution deals that were handed to mayors across the country are focused on those people who can afford to buy a home. And I think we see that reflected even now in the rhetoric of government. It is all about being able to get on the ladder. But we actually have pretty good powers to be able to do up or remediate brownfield land so private developers can get on and build. Where we need more devolution is the ability to actually build social housing. That means reforming Homes England so it responds to the unique needs of mayoral strategic authorities. Or perhaps we should just devolve it altogether, a little bit like the Arts Council. It means flexibility in our funding so we can be more creative in our regional housing plans. And it means helping mayors with incentives on social house building, especially by reforming the right to buy rules and allowing us to set those parameters, to make the financial model stack and to stop this trend of us losing social homes to tenants and then them ending up in the hands of private landlords even quicker than we can build the next ones. Housing, though, is also an example of why we need the devolution of skills funding to go further. If we are to meet our missions, and it might sound like we're ungrateful, but right now the DFE is looking at how to give regions even more funding from specific national schemes designed to fund construction skills. Building more houses will mean more local jobs. That's good for us if we have the right skills in place. Yet, we're in this bizarre position of pitching once for construction skills funding and the Skills Bootcamp Fund, then waiting for Whitehall sign-off for that, then having civil servants find more money, then being asked once again to submit a plan for how we would use the funds, while at the same time discussing with different parts of the actual same department how we can use our overall adult skills fund to support the construction sector. And, incredibly, we then still have to report back to Whitehall separately on how we then use those funds. The system is broken. It feels like utter madness. But this is the logical outcome when you have a country as centralised as ours. However, building homes will only ever be part of the housing story in this country. If you're renting a property in the North East, hearing different officials in London telling you that they're going to help you build more houses, it is not going to make a difference to your life. Owning your own home is great. A lot of us aspire to it. But for millions of Britons, that isn't a reality. For millions, it might not even be what they want. And we need to speak to their lived experience and their needs as well. That means creating a new deal for renters, handing mayors and councils more powers to take on rogue landlords, having a central database of those rogue landlords, and I believe handing mayors the powers to seize the properties from the worst landlords and hand them back to social rent providers so that people can move into them from that social housing waiting list. And right now, the draft English Devolution Bill is being finalised, ready to work its way through Parliament. It repositions combined authorities as mayoral strategic authorities, ready to coordinate services at a regional level, similar to, you might say, regional development agencies. We go full circle. But if we want devolution to be a success, we have to make sure that, unlike the unelected RDAs, mayors have the power to act where people need it. And housing is such a flagship example. Now, the other areas in which devolution is needed is considerably less newsworthy, but are certainly as important an area, and particularly in that sector. It's skills education for 16 to 19-year-olds. At present, mayors can help adults get the skills they need to succeed as long as they're over 19. And local schools can help local children. But if for some reason, and there are millions of children and kids in this situation, if you're 17 and you're trying to make your way in the world, the Permanent Secretary at the Department of Education in London has more say over the support you get than I do. In the North East, we're working with employers to turbocharge delivery of green energy jobs, which will redefine our regional identity. Many of them are on the sites of those shipyards that I talked about just earlier. But we're doing so with a permanent sense of being held back because we cannot steer more investment into handing those young people the rewarding career that they deserve. Every part of everything that we're doing, for me, is about creating opportunity in the North East. When we're going out and we're launching investment prospectuses and saying there's £14 billion worth of investment in the North East, the only reason you do that is to create jobs for the kids that look at these former industrial sites and think there is a future there for me. The people in charge of funding in the capital went to university. They assume that university is best for everyone, and then the funding is awarded on that assumption. There are a lot of problems with this approach, a lot. But the one that stands out for me is the way it does nothing for people who place identity above university. There are a lot of people out there who don't want to go to university, who either didn't grow up in a social network where university was commonplace, or they did, and they just don't want the debt, or they just don't want to continue to learn in that way. Many of those people will probably never go on to live outside the North East by choice. And they'll make that decision by choice. Like more than half of Brits, they'll live less than 20 miles from where their mum and dad lived. And often much less than 20 miles. And they'll be really happy to do so. And that's really good for our regional economy. They are no less ambitious, they are no less deserving of educational investment just because they're not following a career path chosen by Whitehall and Westminster. But mayors at the moment cannot help them. They're at the mercy of a very fragmented and centralised post-16 skills system. For decades, the government rationale for centralisation is that we have to have a standardised approach, especially in skills and education, to avoid the risk of variations that might then lead to poor outcomes in some areas. Ask yourself this. How many more years of poor outcomes from this approach do we have to endure before we realise that the standardisation is completely failing? Further devolution of the skills funding would allow us to try a new approach. And if government didn't want to listen to us and see sense, they can listen to the businesses and their own Industrial Strategy Council who are crying out for this approach. Yes, it has risk built into it, but right now, centralisation has failure built into it, and more of the same is just simply an anti-growth policy. Mayors and regions are best placed to develop and to deliver more joined-up skills pathways tailored to the specific needs of those key sectors, defined by local businesses. We are also far better placed than Whitehall to innovate when it comes to addressing the rising levels of NEETs and preventing their loss in the system at a critical age. The two parts of the system where we see most people who are economically inactive are straight out of education, whether that's post-16 or after university, and then people between 50 and 60. And so this just makes perfect sense. So across the country, mayors are lobbying to change the post-16 system, and that is the number one thing I would ask people in this room to take away. Of course, for many young people, post-16 is too late to intervene. If you were born to parents who didn't go to university, there's a very good chance that you will not go to university. But worse, if you are born to parents who suffer the effects of poverty and financial hardship, there's a really good chance that your situation by birth will define your life chances. Too much of the infrastructure of opportunity has been removed, and too many in hardship are locked into what feels like that certain fate. In the North East, we are trying, through devolution, to change that. By working both with government on trailblazer employment schemes to get families out of hardship, by tackling the physical and mental health barriers to getting back into work, but also through the first of its kind in the country, a child poverty reduction unit, which we've founded in the North East. We're delivering some pretty radical changes for young people. That child poverty reduction unit starts with collaboration. It's delivery focused. When we all got together and said, we know the North East has the highest levels of child poverty in the country, we need to do something about it. The families trapped in this life, they don't need more research. They don't want more lobbying without results. They need support, they need action, and frankly, they need money. So we're creating interventions in the social policy space that also act as economic policy. The first of these measures will be a Mayor's Childcare Grant. I firmly believe that in the same way that transport is infrastructure, childcare is infrastructure. We're going to trial it in Durham to help families back into work, and we all know that really what we're doing is helping mums back into work, the mums who simply cannot get out of the cycle of just not being able to go back to work or who are underemployed, so that we can help them get back to work and survive that difficult adjustment period during the first few pay packets. And I say pay packets really deliberately because the families that we're dealing with, they live pay packet to pay packet. And their measure of wealth is how much money they still have left in their account once the bills go out and it's the week before the next payday. An increase in regional GDP or productivity is great. It looks great on paper, it's a great thing to talk about. But it might as well be an increase in the use of Latin for all the difference it makes growing up to kids growing up in poverty in my region. If you've been out of work for a while and you need to get back into work, it'll be whether it be as a hairdresser or whether it be beating panels at Nissan, devolution should mean that you can elect someone who can make a real difference, a noticeable impact on your opportunity to get employment. The childcare grant will do exactly that. It's money to childminders that means more money for you. And we're going further in some more quite radical ways. Using the devolution deal really designed, if we're honest, to support the economy and businesses, and instead backing the people who once had at least a sure start centre to rely on. Next month, we'll be unveiling the next phase, the second phase of the Child Poverty Reduction Unit, with partnerships within the partnership investing £30 million in direct local interventions, using targeted revenue alongside long-term capital investments. This is money that is designed for economic development, because that's exactly what this is. When I was Policing and Crime Commissioner, we put domestic abuse specialists in the 999 contact centres in Northumbria Police. It was meant to support women the moment that they called for help, and what it did was significantly increase the number of women who sought support after they'd made the really brave step to call 999 or 101. It cost us a lot of money, but we did it anyway because it was the right thing to do. And now it's been rolled out, and that is in every single police force in this country. The North East, working together to tackle child poverty, is going to replicate that approach. We're going to take the risk. We're going to invest the funds to help those that need it the most, and we'll use it to deliver results, not just research and policy papers. And then we'll work with government for real change so we can see more of it rolled out across the rest of the country. So the final area that I'm going to talk about tonight before we get to questions is the need for more fiscal devolutions. Mayors need financial freedom to act and respond to local need. The first step towards this, which we think would be actually pretty painless, is the ability to impose an overnight levy, so a so-called tourism tax. It's so mainstream across the rest of the world that people barely notice it. If you've been anywhere in Europe, you will have definitely paid this. I think I paid €8 in Bologna, and you just don't even bat an eyelid. So I want that small charge on our many visitors to create jobs in the culture and the creative economy, often foundation-level jobs which will keep those same visitors coming back time and time again. For Britain, that has somehow become an oddly radical proposition. It shouldn't be. There are limits to what devolution, fiscal devolution, can achieve, but there are a lot of examples of what happens when a region doesn't have those powers. For too many places, deindustrialisation has led to a sense of self-perpetuating decline and an electorate ready to explode at the lack of not just action, but of attention. Don't get me wrong. I don't think reform is just a protest vote. But there is a wearing in their vote base that has to change. So there is a warning in their voter base that change has to come. When cities in the US or German regions have faced similar pressures to those facing the north, they at least had the local level decision-making powers and some of the fiscal freedom to own the response to a changing world. In the UK, this highly centralised country is robbed our regions of the ability to respond in the way that we need to. When I first ran to be the mayor, I said the mayor's office can't be a political experiment. It's all very well and good standing up and talking about ending capitalism, but if you're struggling to pay the bills, let alone go out after they've all been paid, you don't want an ideology. You want a good job and a good home to come back to at the end of an evening. Successful devolution goes hand in hand with the delivery at the foundations of our economy. And I think that approach should guide not just the next steps in devolution, but also how we do then respond to those populists. There's a fear among many centrists today that that message trumps everything, that delivery is dead, that social media algorithms mean outrage will always outweigh evidence. If we keep doing delivery the way we have, then yes, I think it'll just become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Creating another national quango, opening another competitive bidding round will not get us out of the mess. People want to see local results. They want jobs that they can get, a high street that's worth going to, a bus that shows up. These are not big asks. They're the basics. Devolving the power to deliver those things shouldn't be that challenging. People expect their local leaders to deliver for them, and so they should. And yet, you'd be surprised at how little ability that so many have to actually do this. If we genuinely want to let people take back control, then let them elect in and kick out a leader with the power to get things done on their behalf. I'll end here with an example of how the next stage of devolution can bring together many of the elements that I mentioned. A North East Combined Authority is about a year away from having what they're calling an integrated settlement. That gives us more, obviously not enough more, freedom to move funds between our priority areas rather than the priority areas of Whitehall. And that's what we're good at. We're just not siloed in the way that Whitehall is. The shorthand for that is that we'll be treated much more like a government department as a result. So we've submitted our submission to the spending review, and in there is a bid to help fund a National Centre of Excellence for Hospitality. That investment in the day-to-day skills needed to ensure our service sector has the staff to grow a career. Yes, we want clean energy, offshore jobs. We want a highly skilled workforce that can make the electric cars and the batteries and the charging infrastructure of the future. But we also have nearly half of the local population working in that foundational economy, whose identity is deeply rooted in their place. I want to make sure that they can elect a mayor empowered to deliver for their needs as well, to ensure that a young man or a woman who starts out serving tourists can see a path to running a business in that industry themselves. It's not a glamour industry. It won't be at the centre of government's delivery plans or their record of achievement, but it's the sort of investment that makes a difference between a job that just about pays the bills and a job that actually gives you the money to enjoy the region and the place that you live and the place that you love. No more top-down economic growth plans designed to meet national targets. It's a plan based around our local assets, on people whose jobs make up the vast majority of our workforce. And that's where I stand. Devolution has to empower mayors to empower people. So let me end by thanking you. It's been a real pleasure to spend the evening with you. It's been an honour to have the platform of the 2025 Sir Peter Hall Annual Lecture here at the Bartlett and UCL to make these remarks. As I'm sure that many of you will know better than I, Sir Peter Hall was a great scholar who made a global impact on the study of cities and regions. He, like so many, had a mission to make places better for the people that lived in them. There's some really inspiring examples of the difference that academic research can make when it's focused on people's real problems, their day-to-day things, the things that matter to them. And that legacy comes with a challenge, I think, to every single person in this room. How do we take the knowledge and the expertise and make a difference to the kind of places that I represent? Of course, I'm really aware of UCL's leading position in the global research rankings. I know this place is packed with brilliant scientists and brilliant students and brilliant researchers. But the question I pose tonight is, what difference can your research make in Ashington or Wallsend or Sunderland or Consett? I know that some of the UCL researchers that you have been addressing these challenges head on, and the ongoing work that researchers have been undertaking to support the community, for example, in Sacriston, a former mining town in County Durham. I'm absolutely certain that has everything to do with you, John. So UCL's partnership with Red Hills, the Durham Miners Hall, the restoration of which is almost complete. I absolutely can't wait. Your support at the Coalface exhibition at Washington and in Sunderland, and its powerful moving photographs of the last miners, and UCL's current work on community-led non-clinical interventions in men's mental health in partnership with Space North East and Sunderland. They are all examples of what can be done, but I would welcome so much more of this. I'm encouraged by the emerging partnership between UCL and universities in the North East that builds on these existing partnerships. Cross-regional partnerships look like a promising way to move universities like yours, if it is to help address problems right across the UK rather than just in London. And I think the fact that UCL has appointed a pro-provost in the form of Professor John Tomini to lead this work from a region like ours is a very welcome development. So I believe that there is a chance for you to show national leadership here. More of the same will not take anything that we're talking about further forward. We're seeing every day a bigger demand from local communities for local empowerment. The response to those calls is the challenge that I've laid out, and I really look forward to working with all of you on how we might deliver it. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Kim. So there's now an opportunity after that speech, which set out, I think, a very ambitious agenda and which situates it in the opportunities that are created by devolution. There's an opportunity for us to explore some of these issues with a live mayor in the room. So we're open now for questions and contributions. We've already got a question. Before I come to you, already got questions. Before I come to you, I'm going to ask that everybody speaks into the microphone because we're filming this lecture and it's really important that your questions and contributions are picked up. Okay. So, and also please introduce yourselves.
Thanks very much, John. So, hi, Kim. My name's Akash Pound from Institute for Government, and we do a lot of work there on devolution, very supportive of the devolution process, and it's great to hear your vision for the region, your ambition, and lots of the specific ideas you talked about. The thing I wanted to ask you about was, I mean, you referred to, despite the government, publishing its white paper, making progress towards further devolution, continued at least, ambivalence in parts of Whitehall and Westminster about handing over powers. And I think you're right, like there is, to some extent, maybe, a kind of we know best mentality in parts of Whitehall. But I think there's also something else, which is about concern that if things go wrong at the local level, the accountability system still means that the ministers, the permanent secretary who controls the budgets, are still the ones going to be held to blame and held to account for that. So and this is something we're thinking about with my colleague Matthew here actually, how we could strengthen the accountability mechanisms at the devolved level. I just wonder if you have any reflections on that, whether it might involve whether it's greater transparency about data and performance, whether it's about public accounts committees at the devolved level, whether there should be a regional assembly for the North East scrutinising what you and the combined authority do.
I think that there's something about looking at the accountability structure, but the fact is that you're held to account at the ballot box, the same as any MP, any councillor, and I don't really know why it would be any different. I think that you can very clearly see where mayors who've just had a round of elections have lost their seat, where they haven't delivered, and new parties with new ideas have been voted in. And I don't necessarily think that Whitehall or Westminster has been blamed for any of that. So I think some of that is almost a little bit of a panicked reaction to something that's new, because it is new. That said, I don't think that we should exist without scrutiny, but we've got pretty robust scrutiny committees made up of local representatives. What I would push against, and I think this is really important, is we are not here to be held to account by MPs who exist in a Westminster system. And I think that would be an upside down and back to front way of doing it. So I think strengthening existing scrutiny, I don't think any of us should be frightened of data and transparency and the ability to, and the need to publish more information. But the measures should be regionally determined and the accountability should be regionally delivered, because ultimately we're doing it on behalf of the people of the region. And I think that has to be, in a sense, held pure. And, I say this, as you know, I'm an ideological devolutionist. It is crucially important that the people in the regions retain control of this. I think your point on departments clinging on, I think some of it is, if we're being really kind, working out how to devolve things. And some of it is just a deep desire to cling on to power at the centre. And I think that post-16 skills is such a great example. Like, business want it, colleges want it, young people want it. It clearly isn't working. It is not working. Kids are falling through that crack. And yet, the solution isn't forthcoming, even though it's a pretty clearly ring-fenced thing. So we'll just have to keep working on that, plugging away, working through the relationship with government. What I would say is, 10 months into a new government, with that bill making its way forward, making its way through, that's a lot of change really quickly. And that's pretty impressive when you think about what's been achieved over, say, for example, if I was being party political, the last 14 years. So, yeah, I think, but we want it to be faster. And the reason that we want it to be faster is because, first of all, we are designed in a way where we are able to be more nimble. So delivery at a regional level can happen quicker. If we had more control over houses, they would get built quicker. We know that that's the case. We've seen it proven in other parts of the country. We see it proven in other parts of the world. So there's that. And secondly, that direct accountability to people feels really urgent at a time when you can see so clearly reflected that feeling in communities that they've just been left behind. The system as it currently stands just doesn't make any sense. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Hi, thank you, Kim, for your talk. My name is Sagar. My interest is from a global south to global north perspective. Mm-hmm. I was looking at the website earlier, which is about the northeast for the green transition.
Yeah.
This is something I'm not really sure if people actually understand this, but when I learned about all this stuff about going to renewables 10 years ago, my instant reaction is, okay, where is all these resources coming from? Minerals. Everything from extraction to production to manufacturing is all offshored to 3,000 miles away. Mm. None of it can be processed, manufactured in the UK. Maybe some of it in mainland Europe. The solar panels, the wind turbines, everything has to be manufactured in China. The minerals are sourced from Africa. A lot of it's done in India. So I'm all for giving jobs, local jobs for people across not just the UK, but the whole of the British Isles. And for that to happen, as quite a few economists have said, that you can't build an economy when it's just service-based and you're still importing materials and products from abroad. Mm-hmm. You have to farm and make products in the UK. Now, I'm not saying that we go back 100 years, but we have to look at those factories, the ones which are up north. Mm-hmm. We have to look at the money that's been promised for I don't know how many decades for the Northern Powerhouse, and actually saying, well, instead of disillusioning the people in the north, actually with empty promises, what are we actually manufacturing? Mm-hmm. Where are these parts and minerals coming from? If we're getting them from Africa, China, India, all the BRICS nations, BRICS, I don't mean the BRICS in this building, I mean Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, then we have to ask ourselves, if there is a block in the shipping chain, if there is some fireworks happen between two countries, between here and the Middle East, we're in a bit of trouble because those supply chains are cut off. So my question is that when you said about something about Westminster, if we're going down this green transition, is it really about serving the local people? Is it really about if, for example, you get into power, something like that, is it about you being accountable to Westminster? Or is it about you being accountable to Davos?
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I think, I sort of think that I get the substance of your question. I think what we're trying to do in the North East is build as much of a supply chain as we can. So we're the only English region at the moment that can do everything from research and development through to servicing. So it's not service sector jobs. We've got significant amounts of manufacturing and the opportunity to create around 24,000 green energy manufacturing jobs on the banks of the Tyne in the next 10 years. And so I would argue that when it comes to jobs for local people, that is exactly what we're doing. So we're at the moment, we've just announced an inward investment for a cable making company, something that would once have been done in Korea or America. We're onshoring that, bringing it to the UK. And we have to develop that all the time to get that energy security, because I think your point is right, that there is still part of that supply chain that we're still too reliant on other parts of the world, and we have to work through that as the research develops. But it's not a case of whether we are going down the route of a green transition. It's just, it is. We are running out of natural resources. People need to see that transition. There is a culture war around net zero, which I just cannot get my head around. But even if you lean into that, it just is basic common sense that we have to find new ways of using new natural resources, such as wind or sunshine or whatever, tidal power or whatever else it may be. And so those opportunities, those 24,000 jobs for young people who might well grow up looking at what were completely deindustrialised wastelands along the banks of those rivers and on off the shore of the North East. Like, I'm not going to turn my back on them, and I wouldn't be a very good regional representative accountable to those people if I did. And so I think that, yes, we work with world-leading institutions to continue to develop the supply chain and to become more self-reliant and become more energy secure, because your point about global conflict has literally played out in oil and gas prices because of the conflict with Russia and Ukraine. And so we have to protect ourselves against that. And at the same time, we've got to seize with both hands the opportunity for what will be a sustaining industry for generations to come, as we have literally no choice but to transition. Thank you.
Yeah. Does someone over here wants to speak?
Well, thank you. So I'll just put my cards on the table. I'm a Labour Party member. I actually used to work as a political advisor to a local authority mayor. Guess by the accent, see which one you think it might be. But I was interested, going back to the question around democracy, and I thought what you were saying at the beginning about the decline of industry and how much people lost through that. I think I've always felt, particularly in deindustrialised northern communities, there's a tendency for people to focus on the work and the jobs, and sometimes what's missed is the community and the institutions and the deep culture which also existed around that. And that basically means the labour movement. This was like working men's clubs, it was hiking societies, it was all sorts of different things. A very rich culture, full of traditions, which was all completely decimated with the advent of deindustrialisation. And I guess I just wanted to come through with I guess there's a question for me. I'm a big advocate for devolution. I think it's really good, and I think it's enabling politicians such as yourself and many others to create far more bespoke solutions, and particularly in deindustrialised areas, there's a general focus on reindustrialising and bringing back some of those manufacturing jobs which these parts of the world were actually built on. I think on the policy side, it's all great. What I really am concerned about is actually, I think, on the political, cultural, associational side, I think there's a much bigger problem here. And my own opinion is that the party system plays a big role in this. I think it's really interesting, for example, that combined authority mayors and local authority mayors consistently outpoll their own local party and national parties in elections. And I think that part of that is because the individuals are able to distance themselves from those labels and the brands. But I think that also, though, we're very still in the early stages of devolution, really, with this regard. And I think that one of the reasons that we've got representatives who are capable of doing that, frankly, is because the national party structures haven't got around to focusing and controlling these individuals in the way that, for example, I know lots of people who've got into Parliament recently who are very shocked at the level of top-down control which is being administered at every single level. So there's a question for me around the time bomb. I think as local mayors and regional mayors become more influential, more powerful, I think they're going to attract the attention of the national parties, all of the national parties, I think, more and more. And I guess I'm just interested in your reflections on that, whether or not you do think it is part of an issue, and if there is any kind of awareness and a kind of an awareness of a potential push.
I think you actually asked two questions. I think your point about what I would call sort of social infrastructure is really important. And so, you know, my point about devolution needing to be about more than the economics and much more about those social investments is really crucial, which is why we want more powers. And, you know, ultimately, I want us to be putting back in place some of that social fabric. And I think we as mayors and, you know, I think directly elected council leader mayors, we've really got to do something about the different types of mayors, by the way. That's a whole different lecture for a whole different day. But we're better placed to know what that is. So to feel that culture shift and to feel that the absence of the things that people hold so dear in their communities, whether it is, like you say, you know, a working man's club, or whether it is, you know, a community centre or a sure start centre, or whether it is literally just a cafe that people can go to. Those things are so fundamental in particularly northern working class communities where, you know, effectively lives were built and managed on those things. Like, I grew up in a place where, you know, the community infrastructure was basically like, you know, groups of women helping to manage groups of families, and that's a really deeply entrenched cultural thing that you can't just replace with jobs. You have to be thinking about the wider picture. So I agree with you on that. The party thing, I think it's something that we're deeply aware of and quite proud of, actually. And I think that it's probably fair to say that they might not like some of that, and I'm okay with that. And actually, I think they're kind of okay with it as well. And that's what I think is interesting. I don't feel that challenge to conform. I think that there is an awareness in the system that, you know, what I might want as the North East will be different to what Andy Burnham might want as the North West, or what Richard Parker might want in the East Midlands, and that sometimes we might all want the same thing, and sometimes we want to group together and ask for different things, and sometimes one wants something that nobody else wants. And I think that's a good thing, and you can see that, as you say, in the way that we outperform. I don't get a sense that there is any move to being more controlling of mayors, because I think that there's awareness that that would lead to political losses that nobody wants to sustain. So I think that, you know, that deeply deeply cherished ability to reflect very much the views of your region, I think is useful. I think we make a good show of making it very useful to government, and I don't think that that's the direction of travel. If it were, I think we'd have a problem. And I think the problem that you would have would be some pretty big hitting regional politicians with some pretty big brands and some pretty big followings who would be pretty pissed off about it and would make their feelings known. And that would be more of a problem for political parties than anything else.
Thank you, Kim. Janice Morfitt from UCL. I just wondered, you talked about the meetings that you're going to tomorrow, the Council of Mayors and then the Council of Nations and Regions. I just wondered if you could say a bit about where you think they might be, those two organisations, maybe this time next year or by the next election. What's their direction of travel and how do you see them developing?
What is it that John said? We're building the ship as we're sailing it. And I think that's right. Like, this is brand new. You know, it is. Devolution has been around now for quite a while, particularly in London. But then, you know, the kind of three first devolution deals in Merseyside and Manchester and Teesside have been around a little while. But the first time that a Prime Minister got all of the mayors around a table was, you know, 3 days after the last general election. And so then getting us around the table with the devolved nations as well, and being open about the fact that there's aspiration for more devolution in that freer sense, I think is really important. But I think what we're designed to do is to create that forum by which we can solve some of the, or work through some of the really big knotty issues of the future, and of the current time, and deal with them for the future. So I think Council of Mayors is very much about that devolution agenda, how we get more of it, what we do together, how we act together to advocate that both in government and then also, you know, really support and deliver for our communities. And I think Regions and Nations is about the much bigger picture. And I think that's how it will continue to develop. What will be interesting in a year's time, as it is now compared to when we did it last autumn, is the number around the tables getting bigger. And that's a good thing. You know, so we've seen 2 new moralities come on stream, just elected in May, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I lose track of time. And then we're expecting 6 more at least next year. That's great, you know, as devolution starts to mature and more areas reap the benefit of having their person who they elect in or out, as discussed, around that table, having what I would say is a conversation of equals with central government rather than what I think we became used to, which was like a parent-child relationship. That's great for our communities. And so I'm really excited to be part of that and to see it grow.
Hi, I'm Megan Meek-O'Connor from Save the Children. It's really great to hear what you have to say about child poverty, and I wondered how you're planning or are already sharing that with other mayors in other areas and also with central government, and also what you're hoping to see, particularly in terms of devolution, but also anything else in the child poverty strategy.
Yeah, so we have worked directly with the Child Poverty Task Force, so I've attended that task force, and what I would say is I'm really pleased that this is at least a topic that people are willing to talk about now. If you asked the previous Prime Minister what he thought about child poverty, he would say it was going down, and you know, the rest of us would point and say, you know, if you change the metrics and say something's going down, that's not the same as it's going down. Whereas now we recognise that there is a problem and, you know, there's action being taken to do that. I'd like to see the child poverty strategy come forward. And actually we tried to wait to publish our child poverty strategy after, so that we could plug the gaps in the regional space, and we can't. We're going to have to go first and then hope that some of our policy is adopted nationally. And I think there's recognition in government that we are leading the way, talking about things like baby boxes in the first 1,000 days, childcare. There's nobody else looking at that at the moment. We have pioneered some of the school food stuff in the region. We are looking at benefits advice at the school gates and in community facilities to support people to access what it is that they're entitled to. We've had now devolved £50 million for work and health, for a work and health trailblazer project to tackle those barriers between work and health. And so we're able to pioneer locally in an area where you will be able to measure the difference of it. But what I would say is you will not see an overall reduction in those child poverty numbers without changing probably the benefits system. And I've been pretty clear about that, and others have been pretty clear about that. We need to see change in things like the 2-child benefit cap to lift kids out of poverty. And I think that would be both a very worthwhile and financially beneficial intervention. And I also think it would be very good for the economy as well. So depending, it doesn't matter which lens you look at through it with, child poverty is both unjust, unfair, not right in today's society. It's also really expensive and a really bad economic problem for us.
Hi, Kim. Yeah, thanks very much. I really enjoy that. I'm Louise Kempton. I'm from the Centre for Urban and Regional Development Studies at Newcastle University, from whence John Tominey emerged into UCL. So being from Kurds, I just wholeheartedly want to agree with everything you said in terms of devolution and in particular in terms of the foundational economy. And it's really refreshing to have somebody in your position talking about that and not just focusing on the kind of shiny high-tech sectors that, as you know, are out of the reach of a lot of people in the Northeast. But I wanted to pick up on some of your closing comments about the role of universities and the support that they can give. And you talked about some examples of work that UCL is doing, which we're partnering on some of that with them in the Northeast. So the first part of my question really is, how can universities, particularly the universities in your region, best support you and the combined authority in delivering your missions? And the kind of maybe slightly more difficult part of that question is in the current financial crisis that we're finding ourselves in as universities, that I'm sure you're very well aware of, with redundancies and job cuts and budget cuts at all of our regional universities, how do you resource this?
Yeah, so I think I would obviously have reeled off a list of very useful research that our local universities were also doing if I was there, but we're here, so I didn't. But one thing that they've done, which is fantastic, is come together. So there's 4 brilliant universities in my patch. They've come together, they've created Universities North East. That makes it so much easier for us to work to tackle those issues. And you know, I think that the same is true here as it is there. It's about using the research resources and facilities to actually try and help us to tackle some of those problems that people experience day to day. I went to, last week, the meeting of Russell Group Vice-Chancellors. So they came to Newcastle and were hosted at Newcastle. And one of the Vice-Chancellors asked me a question, maybe it's a little bit of a naughty question really, but it was, you know, why do you think that there's such little public sympathy for the funding cuts or the funding challenges in universities? And, you know, the honest answer is, if we are being honest with ourselves, if you are a single mum who works in Tesco's, lives in Stanley, can't get a council house and can't feed your kids, why do you want to know about what's going on in a Russell Group university? And what relevance does it have to your life? Unless it's, you know, medical research that's going to change the future of, you know, your future if you become ill or something along those lines. Actually, much of what is going on is so deeply out of the grasp of people in our day-to-day society. And so for me, it's about telling the stories about how those things do impact people day to day, choosing the projects that make a difference to people's day-to-day lives, and then being really clear that actually as civic institutions, that's the purpose, as well as, of course, all of the really good work around social mobility. I don't think I'm very well equipped to answer the funding question. I don't know. And it is a challenge. You know, it's a challenge in a world where we're becoming ever more insecure, and, you know, defence is going to need more money, in a world where, you know, poverty is a growing issue, in a world where the NHS is under-resourced, where, you know, education, we've literally got schools that are falling down. It's a really, really difficult question, and I don't think I know the answer, and I think I have to be okay to say that to you. But we've got to work it out, because actually the government that the Labour government that I was a beneficiary of, looked at kids like me and went, 50% of you should go to university. And, you know, there's not a cat's chance in hell that I'd have the education I've got now if that hadn't been really clear. And I think that purpose really did drive a change in, you know, working class fortunes and social mobility. I'm not sure that we have that same purpose now. And I think we need to get together with government and get to a point where we do. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. It's Mark Tudor-Jones, formerly of your parish, from Bartlett now, but I'm not going to ask a question.
I'm enjoying all these Geordies and London mine.
I'm not going to ask a question about the North East specifically, but it's back relating to Janice's question about devolution. And you mentioned about the importance during this transition period of elected mayors, that the mayors come together, that you share that experience, you lobby together, and you provide a voice inside Whitehall and Westminster. Do you think perhaps going forward, given there's going to be likely a proliferation of elected mayors, that the ideal model might not be just the council of elected mayors and nations and regions, but rather that the elected mayors occupy the upper house?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm for constitutional reform. I think that it needs to change. I think, look at Germany, you see, you know, a different model where you have that regional level representation as part of the legislative process. I think the Brown Review did a very good job of making a very clear argument as to why it would be more cost effective, and also it would be really good for citizens. I didn't know that that's the question. I didn't know where you were going. I was thinking, where's he going?
That's what I usually lead you on.
But yes, I mean, I do think that should be the ultimate aim, a directly elected second chamber. I think
you don't think it's a danger then it becomes politicised?
It is.
Supplementary.
No, supplementary. Right.
So I'll repeat the question for the video. So do I think there's a danger it becomes politicised? I don't think there's very much more political than the Lords, do you? Like, come on. It's a little bit like anything. When people go, oh, you know, we need to take the politics out of it. Everything's political, you know, all of it. And arguably, directly electing them is at least a way to help hand political agency to the public. I don't think it's soon, you know, and I think it's actually probably one of those things where it would zap an awful lot of capacity out of a government that's got probably much more impactful things to do that make a difference to people's day-to-day lives. I do. You know, I want to see child poverty tackled. I want to see more infrastructure in communities. I want to see more hospitals built, more schools built. I want to see more powers handed to us so we can build the houses and all of those things. And all of those things are so much more important than constitutional reform for people's day-to-day lives. But I think you've got to have a vision. And I think if you want to make the argument that the way the country's run is not quite right, then, you know, how do you want it to be run? On your point, by the way, sorry, just to pick up on the other thing about things like Council of Mayors, they are massive steps in the right direction of kind of that interface. But the self-organisation bit of it's really important as well. So on Monday, oh my God, what a week, Monday night, we launched the Great North. And that's the Northern Mayors kind of coming together and saying, right, we've got a Northern brand, communities up, that's all around the things that we are collectively good at, whether that is about green energy or whether it is about trade and investment or whether it is about culture and creativity. You know, we're going to do these things together, and that self-organisation is going to be, I think, a really big part of the future, particularly when it comes to lobbying for major infrastructure investment in the North.
Just, Mike Racco, I'm the head of the Bartlett School of Planning here, so thank you for coming this evening. We're really honoured to have you here. It's a quick question about what it is you want national government to do. So on the one hand, you want them to devolve power responsibility. I think that's very clear, and I think it's a very strong case that you made. Right? But what else should be left to national state to do? I mean, is it that, for example, they can offer you an urban development corporation to think about Ben Houchin? You know, I don't know if you want that kind of model. I won't say anything on the speaker, but you know, just down the road. But there are models like that. There could be a national renewal strategy built around military spending, for example. At the moment, there's a lot of talk about that. Is that something you want national government to ensure that spending is coming to the North East? I'm just wondering about perhaps a slightly more positive agenda about what national government can do for you, other than, yes, devolving budgets. Maybe that is all you're asking for. But are there other specific national infrastructure projects and programmes that you could really benefit from and could push for?
Yeah, I mean, so don't get me wrong, right? I want devolution by default, but I don't think that we can run the country in 24 small fiefdoms. Like, that's not right, is it? We have to be really clear about the things that can be isolated and delivered in a way that benefits communities. So as long as it's better for the community, it's better for me. And so I kind of put three things out there. I think there's a whole range more. I think there's really interesting ideas around pacts, but you're always going to have some things delivered centrally by central government, and it has to be. I think your point on major kind of spending, major infrastructure projects of national importance, I think that's where you end up needing a better partnership between government and regions. I think the problem that we've got now is it's just about bidding all the time. And the previous government was worse. You know, it's put your bid in for the spending review, put your bid in for this pot of cash around renewables, put your bid in for this AI investment zone. No. For two reasons. First of all, there is more than enough skill and more than enough difference in the different regions of this country that we shouldn't be competing against each other. We should be competing globally, absolutely, that's what we want. We should not be competing against each other. And secondly, we need to start to see investment flow in a way that benefits people and achieves the aims that we all have around things like growth. And so I would argue probably for national government to make a decision to overinvest in northern infrastructure. And I think you will see probably greater growth from doing that than you'll do from seeing like continued overinvestment in the southeast and overheating of one part of the economy. Those are often projects that span more than one region, that have a critical importance to the way that we're talking about transport, for example, the way that the country moves around, all of those things. They have to be centrally determined, but they can still be regionally driven and delivered in partnership with central government. I suppose what I'm arguing for is a fundamental change in the relationship.
There are about a dozen hands waving at me, and clearly we can't have questions from all the people who want to answer, and our time is up. It says so on the screen over there. And also, I know that a lot of people in this room have had long and hard weeks, and there's a glass of wine waiting next door. So I apologise to those people who've got burning questions to put to Kim. I'm hoping she might hang around for a little bit, and perhaps you can bend her ear while she's having a glass of whatever it is she drinks. But I think it's time to bring the proceedings to a close. I'd like to thank very much Kim for coming here to the Bartlett this evening and being so free and open in the way in particular in the way you've handled the questions tonight. It's refreshing, and I think what we see from the mayors is this ability to speak a bit more freely than we get from national politicians, and I think that's a very noticeable aspect of what devolution potentially brings us. I know it's all early days and there will be all kinds of pressures on you, but I think that's very noticeable tonight. I also welcome your challenge to us as academics generally, and to UCL in particular, to address that question that you put to us. How are we making a difference? And I think it goes to the question a little bit that Louise asked earlier on, and your point about, why aren't the masses rallying to the cause of the universities? Well, it's down to us to address that issue, I think. So I think you've both given us a tour d'horizon of your ambitions. You've spoken freely and openly in response to the questions, and you've left us with things to think about. So that's the perfect evening, and that's in the tradition of the Peter Hall annual lectures. So I'm going to draw things to a close at this point, invite you all to join us for some hospitality. But before we do so, can we thank Kim in the traditional manner?
Thank you.